we kind of we went through the story of the servant of Abraham going back to Haran in order to find a wife for Isaac. And I want to go back just for a second to the 22nd chapter and starting in verse 20, just so we've got a point of reference of what really is going on in this time in this culture. Now, it came about after these things, and those are the things that were just discussed earlier in this chapter, that Abraham was told, saying that Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, as the firstborn. Goes through and details all these particular families' occurrences. And the most important thing is in verse 23, and it was Bethuel who fathered Rebekah. And so what we've got happening here is Abraham has somebody that's coming to him from his former land that knows all about the family. And he's telling them what has happened with his brother and the succession of who's born to who and who's now surviving. And subsequent to this, Abraham decides, Sarah passes away. Abraham decides it's time for Isaac to have a son. He knows what's happening back in his homeland. And chances are that the same thing has happened back in the homeland. That in that household where Laban is the brother of Rebekah, in all likelihood, the person that's bringing news to Abraham brought back news about what's happening with Abraham, how he has flourished, how he has gained wealth. He has a son who's now 40 years old, or approximately that old. So all this stuff is probably being communicated from both sides. So they have a sense as they're moving forward. And so when Abraham commissions this servant to go find a wife for his, he already knows about Rebekah. He's been told that there's this young woman who is basically the granddaughter of his brother. And now his son, he had the son so late in life that Isaac is about 40 years old at this point. We don't know how old Rebekah was, but she's the granddaughter of his brother. And so there's another succession. So it could be she doesn't have her children until she's 60, but we don't know how old she is when she's married. And I've heard it suggested that it was 20 years after they were married. And I don't think she was 40 when they were married, because she's the granddaughter as opposed to being the son. And so it's just interesting. And as we play that out, how many of you could really visualize what was happening there by the spring, where the servant is praying to God, and even before he finishes praying, he looks up and Rebekah's coming to get water. And he knows probably who that person is, or who would be the most likely candidate, because Abraham has commissioned him to go, but Abraham already knows the names of the people that are there. And so it's providential that this scene plays out. But I think the way it's illustrated is really plays like a movie. You can watch these scenes as they move forward, and he's out there by the spring, and then Rebekah goes back and talks to Laban, and then Laban comes back out to the spring, and they have their exchange. Then they go back and they have their party at the house, and the agreement is settled, and finally the servant and his attendants, the people with him, can sit down and have their meal. But they transacted all the business and basically made the arrangement for the marriage at that point. And so what we've got next playing out, this scene is one of those in the movies where you've got the scene playing out, you've got just, it's wonderful how visual this can be. Let me get to the right chapter. Verse 62 of chapter 24. Now Isaac had come back from a journey to Beer Lahairoi, for he was living in the Negev, Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. He raised his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. Rebekah raised her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel, and she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her to his mother's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So now that's very succinct. But when it just says something like, and the servant told Isaac all the things that had been done, he's going to recount that whole journey. We spent this many weeks going out there with our 10 camels. When we arrived, I prayed to God. He's going to recount the whole story of what had happened. And with each accounting, God's hand is so evident in what was happening that by the time he gets to the end of the story and he sees this beautiful woman, even though she's got a veil on her face, it's like everything's confirmed. And, God's hand was at work through this whole thing. But the way I just love the way it reads, because you can visualize what's happening. He's out there, he's journeyed, he's just meditating and praying in the field. And it's when he looks up, there's the answer that he knows his dad sent a wafer, and he knows the camels were the means of transportation. So here's, what everything has been moving toward for some period of time. So it's just the thing about Isaac, and we're going to get into the story here, is as you review the life of Abraham, there's a lot of detail and a lot of circumstance and a lot of potential conflict and turmoil and all sorts of things. Isaac has a relatively uneventful life. Jacob, once he gets going, man, there's all kinds of stuff going on in his life. So we've got these three patriarchs, and Isaac, as we look at him in his role, is a relatively passive sort of circumstance where he's just going from, and you can see how later in his relationship with Rebekah, how she tends to influence what's happening. And she works with her son Jacob, who she loves, in order to manipulate circumstance and that sort of thing. So Isaac is a different sort of character, not nearly as dynamic and,
We call that a little naive or not street smart.
What?
We call that a little naive or not street smart now.
Yes. And that's the thing, is that he's one of the patriarchs and critical to the whole thing. And the promise, again, that God made to Abraham is reinforced with him, and then later it's going to be restated with Jacob again, so that we've got this promise. The other thing, as we get into Genesis 25, now Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him 6 sons. If you go through the numbers there, it lists out 6 sons, 7 grandsons, and 3 great-grandsons. So what we've got from Keturah in Abraham's later life are 16 descendants that are actually named. Now, if you begin to total all these things out, and we'll see what's happening here, because it goes through in a little bit, Ishmael's descendants, the 12 that became 12 tribes or 12 kings, 12 cities, that sort of thing. So what you've got is God has chosen Abraham to be this father of this nation that ultimately is going to bring forth the thing. But what is happening here is he's got all these descendants that are staying in the land. Some are going to the east, some are going to the south. But he's got a huge number of descendants that are basically living among the normal residents of this territory that ultimately is going to be the promised land that they're coming into. And only Jacob and his descendants are the ones of the promise. But they're taken out of this circumstance for 400 years. So all the descendants of Abraham are living with the other people in the culture, in the cities, and And they're growing in population. Esau becomes the descendants become the Edomites. And so you've got his descendants are significantly present among the peoples that are living in the land. And they once again expand, and those however many, I can't remember the exact number that ended up going into Egypt, end up being millions coming out 400 years later. Well, his descendants were in the land as well with all those other people of culture. So it's quite an amazing thing, because I always thought when I was beginning to think the descendants of Abraham, it would be exclusively those of the promise. But his descendants really were just significant numbers and numerous, not just the children of the promise, but there were other descendants that increased that number. So if we get down to verse 7, these were all the years of Abraham's life lived, 175 years. So at that point, at 100, Abraham had Isaac. So Isaac is 75 years old at this point when Abraham passes away. His brother's 13 years older, Ishmael, so he's 89 years old. Abraham breathed his last, died at a good old age, and the old man and satisfied with life. I hope so. And he was gathered to his people. Then his sons Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael has been living apart, has been separate, and primarily in an adversarial relationship with about all other people. He and his descendants kind of maintained that relationship with those people around him. Whatever was between he and Isaac, they're coming together to bury dad. That's, not going to prevent them from being there. Buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field. Ephron, the son of Zehor, the Hittite, facing Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah, and it came about after the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived in Beer Lahai Roy. Okay, so this is the only land. Abraham has been promised this whole land. God says, walk north, south, east, west. It's all going to be your land. But the only land that he actually owns is this field and this cave. And that becomes his burial site, since he bought it in order to bury Sarah. But what we've got is, when you see that term, Beersheba, that's well of Lahairoi. So they've named the area there according to the well. So they've got a source of water. It's down, if we were to find in Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, Mediterranean, Hebron is going to be about right here. Beersheba is going to be about right here. Egypt is over here. Beer Lahai is down here in what was commonly called the Negev. And basically it was an area that would be not as competitive as far as the flocks and fields go and all that stuff. And it's where Isaac is going to be spending a lot of his time. All this land basically was part of the promised land. But here's where Abraham spent most of his time, down in Beersheba. He was buried up in Haran, but this is the area down in the Negev where Isaac is living at this point. So in verse 12, now these are the records of the generations of Ishmael. We don't really need to go through all of those, but essentially, God, when he met with Hagar, and he came to Hagar, and he said, he basically made this promise that you would have 12, that he would be a powerful, there'd be great numbers, that promise was made. So this is just basically reiterating, and what the author's doing here is basically bringing you an accounting of, here's something that was promised, here's something that's the fulfillment, Now let's get on to this primary story, which is Isaac's story. So he's basically wrapping things up for, we told you, you've seen this part of the story play out. You've seen what's happening with Ishmael. Here's the fulfillment of the promise that God made. This is the names of the nations, and that's the people and the cities that they were called after. So now when we get to verse 19, now these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children, and the Lord answered him, and his wife conceived. The children struggled. We learn later that she was 60 years old in verse 26 when she had the children. So she could have conceived it at 59. But my impression is that she was a young woman
Well,
when first brought.
Isaac was 60.
She was 60.
My Bible says Isaac was.
Oh, Isaac was 60 years old. Good. So 20 years after the marriage. Good. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
I don't think she was.
Yeah.
Somebody should have asked sooner.
Yeah. She knows. Don't tell a woman she's 60 years old when she's only 40. So she could have been 40 at this point. Isaac, they've been married for 20 years. She could have been 36. So we've got her giving birth, but the story is playing out here. The children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is so, why am I in this condition? And she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her. So anybody that has felt an infant, a single infant, moving in a pregnant woman knows that, okay, that may not be all that comfortable all the time to be happening if you happen to be carrying those. We men don't know the details of this, but it's twice as much activity if there's two of them in there.
And they're wrestling.
And that's the thing is, this is a foreshadowing of what's going to happen with these boys once they're out and about, because it's going to be their conflict. Their natures are totally different from one another. And already they're basically having they're demonstrating their character and their nature in the womb. Now, I didn't believe it at first, but Jan and I had two children, and even in utero, their nature began to show. How our son was a very passive and calm and mild, other than hiccups, not a lot of disturbance going on. Our daughter was, but they were doing it in the womb. Even before they were born, their nature was beginning to express themselves. And it's dramatically illustrated here that even in the womb, and she's so concerned about what is going on, that she appeals to the Lord. She may not have known that there were twins in there, but she knew that this is a lot of activity.
I never thought about her not knowing until he said,
there are two.
Nations.
Yeah.
The early sonogram.
Yeah.
God, the first sonogram.
Whoa.
Yeah. 2 nations in your womb, and 2 people will be separated from your body. Okay, it's twins. Relax. This is natural. This is not just, some horrendous circumstance going on with your body. And one people will be stronger than the other, and the other will serve, and the older will serve the younger. So it's interesting now. We've got God actually coming in response to Hagar. We've got him coming in response to Rebecca in this circumstance of giving her assurance, giving her some sense of, okay, it's okay. This is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to happen, and this is how it's going to even play out. And when her days to deliver were at an end, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came out red, all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau, which is hairy, basically the meaning of that name. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand holding onto Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob, which literally means hand holder, or heel holder. It literally means heel holder, or later it became a supplanter, would be the meaning of Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. So they've been together for maybe 20 years, 24 years or something if she was 16. And now they have these two infants, which would be a fulfillment of the promise that through your descendants. So afterwards, his brother came out holding onto Esau's heels, so he was named Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when he gave birth to them. So we've got this scene playing out, which also is very kind of nice that you can begin to understand the dynamics of this situation. They're still living in tents. They're still out in a remote region. They're, this is the life that they live. They go to the wells and they get their water, and that's part of their life. And so, within this circumstance, even though he's relatively wealthy, by comparison, that's the life that they're living. In verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a civilized man living in tents. So you got this rough character that's out. He can hunt. He can, live on his own and survive in the wild. Sometimes he gets a little excessively hungry, and that's going to cause him some trouble a little bit later on. But you've got this character who's just this dynamic man of the wild. I can go out and hunt and get game, and I don't, he's not going to be satisfied with living in the community and caring for the flocks and doing all the domestic duties of an overseer for the land. And so Jacob, now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So Jacob is there, probably close at hand, mama's boy, maybe.
I was gonna say,
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. Maybe a mama's boy, but he's going to be a responsible leader. He's going to be one that's there, and all the servants, who are they going to go to when Abraham's gone and they need guidance as to what to do?
Well, Abraham sent his servants away too, because in the first part of chapter 25, it says Abraham gave gifts. He gave everything to Isaac, and then while he gave gifts while he was living, and sent the concubines eastward into the east country. So there's not much help left.
Yeah. And anybody that's left is basically attached to Isaac and his household.
Right.
And but Esau's coming and going. And we see him coming in later here, and it's classic. When Jacob had cooked a stew one day, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. I can just visualize this. Rough character, stinky, comes flopping into the tent, and his response, Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a mouthful of that red stuff there, for I'm exhausted." Therefore he was called Edom by name, which is red. And later, Edomite becomes the name of his descendants, and they then become a prominent nation that stays when Jacob and the rest are going off to Egypt. And Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." Esau said, "Look, I'm about to die. So what use then is my birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "First swear to me." So he swore an oath to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread, lentil stew, and he ate and drank and got up and went on his way. So Esau despised his birthright. So that's a fairly huge unbalanced exchange.
That
Let's put
man
it
was
that way.
angry.
But still only being birthed like 1 minute before. I
Yes.
mean, should have been split, but that was just fine.
Yeah. Well,
As a
normally,
twin, I'm saying it should have been split.
don't know about the exact dictates of this time frame, but in the time of the later time with the Israelites as a nation, it would have been 2/3 would have been of everything would have gone to Esau, and then 1/3 would have gone to Jacob. But all the leadership, the prince, the priests, everybody then would be in those roles. Whoever the birthright was would be those primary leaders, the priest for the family, and all those. And so, who would be the better person to do it anyway? And God knew that. And so it's just it plays out such that there's an immediate conflict, and a result of what's happening here is basically we've got then from here, this was Haran, right? Which is where Rebecca came from. When there is a necessity to flee, where does Jacob go? Goes back up to where Laban is, to the household of Laban.
One wonders how much Jacob knew about what Rebecca had been told about the older shall serve the younger.
I have
And
a
how
feeling.
opportunistic he was just being. Oh, maybe this is my chance to get the birthright.
Well, when he goes along with her whole plan, when it comes time to get the blessing, I think he's probably been, informed and well informed. And I think I think in Isaac's case, he probably did not have clear-headed enough sense of who would be the best leader to take over.
Because he loved Esau.
He loved Esau. And, we tend to overlook shortcomings when we love someone. And again, in the start of chapter 26, now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went up to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Now, didn't we run into Abimelech once before? May not be the same guy because it might actually be a descendant with the same name, who's also king. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land in which I shall tell you. Live for a time in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For you and your descendants, I will give these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven. I will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and fulfilled his duty to me and kept my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." That promise that was made way early on to Abraham, in chapter 12, verse 1, "Go from your country, your family, and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless them who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And all the families of the earth will be blessed by you." So it's almost a reiteration of the promise that was made to Abraham here to Isaac, where he's basically, extending once again, this promise is for you. So Isaac lived in Gerar, where the men of the place asked about his wife. "She is my sister," for he was afraid to say, "my wife."
Where you learned that?
Yes. How many times are we going to go through this? And that's why I don't think it was the same Abimelech, because he said, "Oh, you're Abraham's son, and this is your sister." Mm-hmm. So I think it was probably a descendant of the original Abimelech, because this has already played out one time, and it's like,
And once bitten, twice shy. He probably wouldn't have fallen for that same thing twice.
You know, and it's just like thinking the men of this place might kill me, and on account of Rebecca, since she is beautiful. Now it came about when he'd been there for a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from the window and saw them, and behold, Isaac was caressing his wife, Rebekah. Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she certainly is your wife. So how is it that you say she is my sister? And Isaac said to him, because I thought otherwise I might be killed on account of her. And Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might have easily slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech commanded the people, saying, he who touches this man or his wife will certainly be put to death. Now Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100 times as much. The Lord blessed him. The man became rich and continued to grow until he was very wealthy, for he had possessions of flocks and herds and great households. So the Philistines envied him. What was the difference in what transpired with Abimelech in the first circumstance and Isaac? What did Abimelech do with Abraham? He gave him all kinds of stuff, you know, just.
Wasn't there a curse involved too?
Yeah, well, the household was all cursed because they couldn't conceive, and we don't know what other plague was placed upon them. But in this case, all he's getting is just, okay, God is blessing him. God is enriching him, and it's not necessarily Abimelech that's enriching him. As he's living among these people, it is evident that he's being blessed 100 times yield on what he's done. Now all the wells in which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham, the Philistines had stopped up, filling them with dirt. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are too powerful for us. So Isaac departed from them and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. So when Abraham was living with Abimelech, he and his servants and attendants had dug a whole bunch of wells. This whole thing where you've got, I think you could have been 1,000 people that are living in tents, moving with Abraham, moving flocks around. They're going from place to place. He's having wells dug, and when they're successful, they can stay in that area long enough to graze the land till they have to move on to another section, and then they're going to find another source of water, and then they're going to move. So you got a fairly large area, and essentially what happened was the Philistines were filling in those wells. They didn't want anybody else coming in and populating that land. And so what Isaac's going to have to do is go back and reestablish some of those. Then Isaac dug again the wells of water, which had been dug in the days of his father. For the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the same names his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley, and they found there was a well of flowing water, the herdsmen of Gerar, so these are not necessarily the people, the Philistines, these are the herdsmen that are out there in that territory already, argued with them because that's our water. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over it too, so he named it Sittoth. And then he moved away from there and dug another well. They did not quarrel over it, so he named it Rehoboth. And at last the Lord had made room for us, for we will be fruitful in the land. So literally what's happening is he had been staying over here in the area of the Philistines. He's moved out a little bit, and then every time he's setting up, and then he's running into conflict with the people that are living in the territory. Finally, he gets out here, he digs a well, and nobody's fighting him over it. And at that point, he says, now, this is an area where we can stay. We can live and prosper and continue to grow in this area. And so that's playing out here as he's living down here in the land. And he went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him at the night. So he's probably living down here in this area somewhere. This is Beersheba. I guess I'm not going to put BS up there. Beersheba, under B. And so he's been living down in this area, he goes up to Beersheba. Beersheba is where his father lived a significant portion of his life. And that was a territory where he had lived for quite a while. And the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. There already was a well there at Beersheba. Probably got buried in again by someone else. So they dug a well, they made an altar at Beersheba. So now he's still a fairly prominent influence in this area. And as we pick up in where are we time-wise?
8 minutes.
Oh, 8 minutes. 3 minutes. Okay, we'll just glance at this a little bit. So what's happened is he's become such a prominent force out here that Abimelech came to him from Gerar with his advisor,
Him.
as the field, and
His advisor.
Philcol, the commander of his army. So he's not coming alone. He's coming with some backup. Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you? And they said, we've seen plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, an oath must now be taken by us, that is, by you and us. So let us make a covenant with you that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. You are now blessed of the Lord. Then he made them a feast. They ate and drank, and in the morning they got up early and exchanged oaths. Then Isaac sent them away, and they left in peace. And now it came about the same day that Isaac's servants came in and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, we have found water. So he's called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. So Abimelech here is monitoring. He's probably getting reports about Isaac and how he's expanding in the land, how he's got territory, how he's become a significant force. Probably what you said earlier, that Abraham actually had sent away a lot of the people off to the east. The descendants which would potentially be competitors with his son Isaac, they're gone. And then Ishmael has already been sent, and he's living in the wilds even lower than this. And so we've got then Abimelech is just saying, and the Philistines, how well did they get along with Israel later on?
No. Oh, but you got to finish the chapter. The chapter's the last part.
Okay. When Esau was 40 years old, he had married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah.
So how much energy did Abraham spend in making his servant go all the way back and made him swear that you were not to get my son away from Canaan and get as far away? And then he took all these concubines and his whole tribe and just stay away from my son, stay away from my son. And what's the next thing he does? Not one, but two.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I'm thinking, and I wonder why.
Yeah, and so, of course, Rebecca's not thrilled about that.
Well,
I don't think I'd be thrilled.
Isaac and Rebecca were not very thrilled.
Yeah.
I'd be thrilled either.
Well, Rebecca's not thrilled, but Isaac's not thrilled.
Yeah, ain't
That's
mama
the way that
happy, ain't
goes.
nobody
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah, and that's the thing is,
all of that.
Esau then and all of his descendants become the Edomites. And so they are a thorn in the side of Israel for many years. And it isn't until, I'm trying to think, almost 120 some BC before they were just quashed completely. So they were still a prominent force. And all these other descendants of Abraham were basically going to be playing parts in what was happening in the future in this region. And the promised people were just literally taken out of there while the rest of these people just grew and expanded in the territory. So I think we're done.
Oh.
We'll pick it up next week.